Photography Daily is a Loading Zone production.
You know how I talked about owning the world's most expensive pair of Wellington boots? Well, you can probably hear that I need them on this walk. I have no idea where I am. I drove today listening to the news and just turned off about 8-9 miles from my front door, parked up, saw this track that then turned into, well, frankly, a bit of a flood. But I'm on my own, and that feels appropriate for today's show. And I realised how at the start of these Photowalk editions, I always have a few words about what's coming up, and today it feels a little more like a monologue, the type that you hear at the start of many a talk radio show, and I shall use this then if I ever wish to go back into Radio Land as my show reel. But I just, while I have your ear, I just really felt I needed to share something with you. So fasten your seatbelt and put your tray in the upright position. I remember at the start of the original lockdown in 2020, which for us in the UK was the 23rd of March, 3 days before our Jack's 11th birthday. I remember those first days and weeks thinking or perhaps feeling very impotent in terms of anything I could do. I stopped posting to my Insta feed. I stopped blogging. I just considered, with what was going on in the world, who'd possibly want or need to know about my light and fluffy social photography. Actually banging pans on the street each Thursday night at 8 p.m. for the doctors and the nurses and the key workers was pretty much all I felt I was able to offer. And for those not in the UK, the banging pan thing, in case you're not aware of it, started from a movement which in itself started from just one hashtag, I think I'm saying. It was our way of supporting those that were bravely in the hospitals doing what they needed to do, and those that were still delivering the food and making sure the supply chains were still working. So yes, it started from just one hashtag. So never, ever, ever believe that your voice is too small in this world. One hashtag later, and you have a movement. So there we were, every Thursday night at 8 p.m. And for many of us, it was the only time we really saw our neighbours. We'd all stand on the street, wouldn't we, and beat 7 Watsits out of our pots and pans, making as much noise as we possibly could. And I think for the first week, I was exceptionally Englishly reserved about it. But by the second or third week, well, we literally, as a family, shattered 2 or 3 wooden spoons and put firm dents in one of the pans in particular. And I know we were doing it for the key workers, but I can't help thinking it was also a very, very strong mental way to let off steam, all those anxieties that we'd been collectively collecting. And I feel a strong sense of that impotence once again now with a world event that's less than double the miles away from where I was last week in Norway when I spoke with you, on a peaceful slope on a mountain. It all simply, well, just frankly baffles me. As a simple lad from the Shires of England, I wasn't programmed to even begin to understand geopolitics, or how a man described as enigmatic or charming, sharp, even likable, was really a revanchist narcissist, blinded by nostalgia, it seems. And maybe you'll forgive me for breaking the neutrality I feel I usually show, I suppose, when it comes to politics. But last week I said humanity seems to have this uncanny knack to thump itself on the nose when it can just about see the light again. And that's exactly how this feels. It's a kind of a square oneism, if there's such a thing. So I started to think about my photography again over the last 7 days, my Insta feed and even this podcast. And I thought, would the letters I usually read out somehow not fit with what was going on in the world? Just like when my dear father passed away and I was presenting a a breakfast show on the radio, a very light, fluffy breakfast show, actually. And I ask myself over and over, does this seem right? Should I smile? Should I laugh? Should I engage in the normalities and the everydays? But then I read something today about mindfulness during this period, written by Mind, and it linked to another piece that I shall link to in the show notes today by a global citizen, how you can help Ukraine. But also Mind talks of the need for balance, to engage in what you usually do. And for me, or for us together on this podcast, that's to walk and to make pictures and to think and to talk together and to share and engage with nature, that kind of balance. And that doesn't mean I or we switch off from all the horrific events unfolding hour by hour in Ukraine. So we are walking as normal, and as I say, I have no idea where I am, but I'll make some pictures and share them on the show page. And I will be taking some of your letters with me and reading them out as normal. But thematically, I thought it entirely appropriate this week to support Ukraine. And with the very close, modest community I feel blessed to have, and I'm talking about you now, that in our way it's part of our modest movement for peace. Maybe not a hashtag that brings us all together banging pans of a Thursday night, but a voice upon a voice upon a voice upon a voice. And it's a difficult show to navigate today in terms of its current nature, because the guests I have on spoke to me at various points earlier this week. And of course, the nature of podcasting decrees that you may not be listening to this on Friday the 4th when it was released. It may be a Saturday or a Wednesday. It could be a month or 2 months on, when you know how this dangerous situation played out or is playing out still, hopefully not. And it seems odd to think that future you is listening back, either celebrating peace, well, hopefully, or wondering how escalation escalated further. Indeed, I've walked as close to the episode coming out as I possibly could this week. Sometimes I make my walks on as early as a Tuesday or a Wednesday, but this one is as close to the show coming out as possible, knowing that even 24 hours can date some of the things that you'll hear today. So please bear that historically in mind as you listen. And also I want to introduce you to three voices who are right now making pictures, helping those in the country of Ukraine, telling their photo stories 1,500 miles away from where I'm stood today, which is not really very far when you think about the geography around wherever you live in the world right now. They're in Lviv and Kyiv, people who live and work there, who have families there, who, like us, are no doubt trying to make, some sort of sense of this. Not that you can. But who, unlike us, are not watching this on television, but they're existing alongside this entire mindless violence. We have Mark Neville, a British artist and documentary photographer and filmmaker who made Ukraine his home for reasons that may uncomfortably surprise you. He is behind Stop Tanks with Books, and he speaks to me in a two-part conversation today from Lviv. Mikhail Palinchak, who is a Ukrainian street and documentary photographer, who was the official photographer for the fifth president of an independent Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, and Wolfgang Schwan, who was referenced in several places as a photographer to watch. And he's caught my eye because he's photographing his first conflict, and there seems to be an interesting personal story as he tries to understand what has gone and what is to come in the capital, Kyiv.
Today on the Photowalk.
What I don't understand, and I still don't understand, if I could see it, and I'm not a political strategist, I'm just some 55-year-old bloke with a camera. If I could see it coming, then you can be damn sure that a lot of other people knew it was in the post as well.
There's an apprehension to stay because if you do get encircled and then they decide they're going to escalate rocket attacks or send in thermobaric missiles, then it's a bad situation to be in.
When you see the news that one country put sanctions into Russia, other country gives Ukrainian weapon, you understand that yes, Western world support us.
Yeah.
But you feel this when you receive 100 messages from unknown person on Instagram.
Stories of life told by photographers, and today more of your stories too, about what photography means to you, why you make pictures, what you make them about, how your camera helps you to see the world. It's a very different type of photography show, made out on location on a photo walk. Me with my camera, you with yours, earbuds in, and a mailbag of letters. Plus, of course, our guests, and this week is a slightly different format as I talk with photographers in Ukraine. Although we'll still be inspired by some words from former guests, as usual too. John Carmichael on chasing a picture that he'd dreamed of since a school geography lesson, and Joel Meyerowitz on the democracy of photography and how eventually we find our creative feet. And I'm helped this week, as ever, to bring the show to you by friends in Europe and the US at mpb.com, who, of course, help you buy and trade and sell the kit you need to make your pictures or videos or indeed sound projects. The number one company in the UK and Europe and the US for used quality camera kit. And of course, they also help us as photographers engage in sustainable ways of shopping, being part of the circular economy. And this week there's another question to the product specialist team at MPB to help you make your decisions. This comes from Martin Oates. Is it important, asks Martin, to know how many shutter actuations have happened in mirrorless cameras, as in when you buy a DSLR? The answer from MPB, well, although some mirrorless cameras have an estimated shutter life, it's commonly considered that most can and do last longer than mirrored cameras, since electronic shutters don't add to actuations. It's therefore nearly impossible to get a true mechanical shutter actuation count from 90% of mirrorless cameras. And with cameras such as the new Nikon Z9 doing away with a mechanical shutter altogether, shutter life is soon going to be a thing of the past. But you can send your questions to the team at MPB via studio@photographydaily.show. So what's on the show then this week? Alongside our guests, we talk about a virtual exhibition that I know will inspire. Our friend Niels Armelinks shares some thoughts about John Carmichael's impossible total eclipse picture being in the moon's shadow, in totality, made from the tiny window of a commercial jetliner. We reflect upon Joel Meyerowitz' message about what success actually means or is. We have a potent letter on the beauty of Ukraine. We talk 365s, or one in particular, and, well, it seems this show is being used as a nightcap. More on that later. So lots to talk about and hear about today, and reflect about, actually, as we spend time with each other on this photo walk in this very special edition. Shall we walk then? Well, coffee and Garibaldi's packed? Check. Well, half checked on that one. Boots on and laced? Check. Warm walking trousers? Check. Spare batteries? Check. Film or cards? Check. Earbuds in? Check. Lens caps off? Let's walk. Much of today then is about Ukraine. I'll make no apologies for editorializing during the walk, and we'll start with some of your letters in a moment. Let's make a picture. It is a photo walk show, so I like to try and make a picture from where I'm walking. I'm using the X Pro 1 today with a 12mm lens, entirely manual experience. It's a very grey sky today, not too much going on, but let's get a record picture. My sketchbook image for the show page today. Let me pop you in my top pocket here so I can carry on talking to you while I'm making the image. There we go. So it's all paths here. It's going to be pictures of paths today, I suspect. ISO 640. F8, and here we go. Manually focusing using focus peaking. Always on red usually for me, but it's you don't get that option in an X Pro 1. It's white. There we go. Let's rescue you from the pocket. So yes, much of today is about Ukraine, and as I say, I'll make no apologies for editorializing during the walk, but let's start with some of your letters following some recent shows before we hear from our guests today. And there will be links on the show page, plenty to go and visit today. So where to start? Well, do you remember the conversation I had with the photographer Carolyn Mendelsohn during the first lockdown, in this country at least? Her work as a commercial photographer completely dried up, like many who earned their living from being a photographer. So she organised to, in this enforced downtime, she organised to work with young people who could voice their feelings about what a pandemic meant to them through the medium of photography. And the work that surfaced from this is part of an extraordinary larger body of work called Through Our Lens, Growing Up with COVID-19. It's obviously now, a couple of years on, been a while in the making and the planning, and now there's an exhibition which is in the UK physically at a well-known gallery called Impressions. But of course, half our audience don't live in the UK. In fact, over half, and those that do may not easily be able to get to the Impressions gallery. So, handily, there is an online exhibition experience, which I have seen, and it's brilliant. A thing that came out of this COVID experience, and people having to think, I'm sorry to use the corporate expression, think outside the box, but those that had to think that way, and these fantastic virtual exhibitions sprang up, didn't they, for artists and photographers. And the virtual exhibition, this virtual exhibition, is fantastic. It runs until, the actual exhibition in the Impressions Gallery runs until the 26th of March. I assume that means that the virtual one will run along the same date line. I'll be placing a link on the show page today, which has many links to all that we talk about today. So best of luck, Carolyn. And I hope that goes well. I know you've got some events around it. I dearly would have loved to have come to one or some of those. Next up, Niels Armelinks has been in touch. Niels' story on this show touched so many people, and I know that by the letters that you've written in. And if for any reason you're playing extreme catch-up and you haven't heard yet episode 279, Niels is the photographer who was given 5 years to live after a cancer diagnosis. 4.5 years later, and this wonderful family man and photographer is cycling up the most extreme hills and mountains the Lake District in the UK can offer, and he's making these just gorgeous pictures. And we shared some alongside his story, of course. And I got a letter from him this week as he came back from his ski trip with his beautiful young family. Hi, Neil. So nice to hear people have been writing in about our chat and that people are inspired. On our drive home from the airport, we were completely captivated by John Carmichael's story on the show. What an incredible series of events to get that photograph of a total eclipse from an airliner. Looking forward to hearing more from him in due course, which you will, because he's coming back to talk to us about another, well, at least one photographic story. Anyway, today people around the world, says Niels, will have started receiving issue 23 of Sidetracked magazine. I thought you might be interested to read the article that I wrote for them, as I talked about it in a bit of detail during our conversation. Yes, I remember that, and I've seen the issue now, and it was a fascinating read. Understanding the human, it was a very human story, and understanding how you could. This is something that I picked out of the story. I apologise if I've gone for the angle that perhaps you didn't want me to, but this being able to consume this regime of medicines, when you're, and I'm going to exaggerate now, 85,000 feet up a mountain. It's certainly opened my mind to positive thinking, Niels, and stepping up to the challenges of life and fitness actually too. So Sidetracked magazine issue 23. Let me know, Niels, when we're able to share an online PDF. Because I know I can't do anything like that just yet, but it will be wonderful to share. Or, of course, go and buy Sidetracked, issue number 23. But you did mention John Carmichael, the photographer who made this amazing stitched picture of the total solar eclipse from the window of a commercial aircraft against all odds. And I had a number of mails and messages about that show from Jeffrey Ragel. What an amazing story to hear somebody with such a strong focus on a singular event and a passion for photography go through such a wild experience to successfully capture this moment that he so long desired. It was captivating. Yes, he wanted to make this picture since being a child in a geography class, hadn't he? I purchased a copy of his image called 108. Only the second image I've ever purchased from another photographer because of your interview with him. Well, thank you very much for doing that. Kelvin Brown, this story needs to be told via a Hollywood film. Right from his school days, everybody needs this feel-good story of dedication. Amen to that. And Howard Inkip, I've seen John's TED Talk on this, though there were parts of the story told on the show not mentioned in his TED. What a captivating interview. Even though I knew what was going to happen. It was like I wasn't sure it had the ending I knew. Sign of a very good storyteller. Knowing the outcome, but still wondering if I'd remembered the ending correctly. A must listen. Thank you, Neil. And of course, a heartfelt thank you to John. I think we should have an inspirational revisit to that show just for a moment, don't you? Here's John talking about making a picture of a totality eclipse, something he'd dreamed of, as we say, since being a lad in geography classes.
So it wasn't necessarily what inspired me to get into astronomy. I had always loved space and astronomy since before I could remember. I used to build and launch model rockets as a kid growing up and built dozens of them. One of them was 6 feet tall and flew 2,000 feet up in the air. But she is the one that taught me what a total solar eclipse was. And she turned out all of the lights in the classroom. She got out a globe. She had one of the students hold a flashlight across the room representing the sun, and she got out a baseball representing the moon and started orbiting the baseball around the globe, showing us what the moon's phases are. Here's a quarter moon and a new moon and a full moon. She said every once in a while, though, the moon will perfectly align in between the sun and the earth, creating what's called a total solar eclipse. And it's very rare, but if you're lucky enough and in the right place at the right time, you can be inside that moon's shadow. And from Earth, you would see the entire sky in the middle of the daytime suddenly turn completely dark like it's midnight within seconds. And she showed us photos and everything of it, and I was so shocked that I had never heard of this before. I'm like, what? This exists? How have I never heard of this? I ran home from school that day and I said, Mom and Dad, have you ever seen a total solar eclipse before? And no, I don't think so. And I'm like, you never been to totality? And my dad's like, what's totality? And I'm like, what? How could you live your whole life never seeing one of these?
John Carmichael. And he will be appearing again shortly over the next month or so with the next part of his story. So let's hear from the first of our three guests today, and it's going to be Mark Neville, whose conversation I've split Mark's conversation into two parts today. He's a British artist and photographer who, for reasons you're about to find out, relocated to Ukraine. It is important today that we talk with photographers who are resident in the country, and three of my guests are. Mark is no stranger to being in a situation which, for many of us, would take us well beyond our mental comfort zones. So we do touch on PTSD, which is an ongoing subject and conversation with guests on this show. So here's part one of my conversation, taking us to Ukraine and Lviv with Mark Neville. Mark, I think before we talk about the book that I've learned about, your pictures, and how as an artist and photographer you intend to tell this story, as you're in Ukraine, as someone who's settled there, what are your own feelings? How are you feeling? I would imagine you must have a gamut of emotions.
Well, what happens is you kind of get forced to make all these moral, ethical choices when war begins about who to prioritize, what to prioritize, where your responsibility is. So is your responsibility to save your elderly parents? Is it to look after your wife? Is it to pick up a gun and try and defend your country? Is it to get out as quickly as possible so you can be more effective from a place of safety? Is it to fundraise? Is it to take pictures? Is it to do interviews? And the problem is normally there's no black or white answer to those questions. You know, normally there's a kind of mushy grey area, but the questions are kind of life and death in a sense. Yeah. So you kind of end up questioning what your kind of feeling is towards the whole notion of responsibility, and that's deeply, deeply exhausting. Yeah. And as well as the physical and mental stresses of knowing that, you know, you've got this huge Russian army encroaching on you from all sides and could move direction towards you at any moment. So there's a kind of intense psychological pressure going on all the time, I would say.
You have faced some of these ethical questions before, haven't you? You've been in situations akin to this.
I have been in war zones quite a few, not that much, but quite a few times before. I mean, I was in Helmand, Afghanistan, with British troops about 10 or 11 years ago, and came back with post-traumatic stress disorder then from that experience. But that was a long time ago. I was treated for it successfully. And since that time, I've been back to Ukraine's front line many times in Donbass, the front line as was in 2014, and been there with the soldiers in the trenches probably at least, it must be 10 or 20 times now I've been there. So I do have some experience of the kind of feelings that are coming up in me and in everyone else. But it's terrible because it's not just a question of people losing their lives or being maimed. It's the psychological damage that you inflict on the whole population for a long, long time. And that trauma is generational, you know, it gets passed on. We now know pretty much that that kind of generational trauma gets passed on genetically. So your DNA gets coated with a kind of chemical, actually, which is produced by trauma of extreme kinds, like being in a war zone. So I'm just feel incredibly sad is how I feel all the time, and thinking, what can I do next to actually contribute? Because these are my people now. You know, I'm English, but I moved here deliberately and consciously because I felt my heart was here for all sorts of reasons to do with my love for the people, the food, the country, the history, the culture.
You're in Lviv now as I speak to you, but Kiev is your home and has been since 2020. And we'll talk more about the history that's brought us here more, Mark. But tell me about last week, because things have happened to necessitate relocating.
Basically, the first day of the invasion, which was Thursday the 24th, I was woken up by the sound of an explosion and then sirens. And I got up, went outside, had a walk around, switched on, you know, the internet, and immediately I knew something was wrong. You know, the internet kept on coming in and out, and then I saw some reports, and then I spent the day with my partner trying to decide what to do and whether we should go or stay. And even right from the get-go, you know, many hundreds of thousands of people had decided if the war did begin that they would leave. There had been quite a big build-up to this invasion, as you know. Yeah. And we had to decide what to do. And my apartment is in central Kiev, quite well within 50 meters, I would say, of the presidential home. I got a report from someone I know in the Ukrainian government who contacted me to say, listen, we've had intelligence that they're going to launch a missile attack on the presidential home this evening. And I thought to myself, there's no question now. It's not should we go or not. It's like, well, if someone's telling me there's going to be a missile attack within 50 meters of your home, if someone said that to you and you're living in Oxfordshire, for example, you wouldn't think twice, would you? You'd think, okay, probably it's a good idea to leave my home. And especially if you're responsible for your partner, you know, for your wife. So We found a lift, which wasn't easy and very stressful. We found a lift in a van with about 5 other people, and we drove solid, without stop for 24 hours in traffic jams to Lviv. We arrived here. We had nowhere to stay. Everywhere it was full. Lviv, it still is, of people getting away from either Kharkov, which you've seen has been utterly decimated.
Yes.
Or from Kiev, which is also really suffering at the moment. So was it the right decision? I don't know. I mean, we're still having sirens here in Lviv. There's still, a big threat here. People are talking about the army coming down from Belarus, which is not far actually from Lviv. And we're here. For now, we're still here. And I'm furiously trying to support people coming from Kiev to Lviv, trying to find people accommodation, trying to get my book out called Stop Tank Food Books, which was actually ready and sent out. 100 copies were sent out 4 days before the invasion.
I know. I think this is a good time to talk about the book Stop Tanks with Books, but actually there is a backstory to this story, isn't there?
Well, I'd never been to Ukraine before, but I made a book in Britain called Battle Against Stigma, which is all about mental health issues in the British military. And it was banned by my own country. So in other words, it was printed in Spain, and it was seized by UK Border Force when it was sent over from the printer in Spain to Britain. So they seized 500 copies of the 1,500 copies that were made in total.
Right.
Basically, the Ministry of Defence contacted UK Border Force, and they didn't want the books disseminated because they didn't want to admit that PTSD was such a huge issue in the British military, as it is in every military. I mean, I went on television, radio, newspapers talking about it, saying, where are my books? You can't do this. And about the same time, summer 2015, I got an email from Kiev Military Hospital in Ukraine saying, listen, we heard about your book about PTSD. We've got all these people coming back from frontline Donbass who are not only injured, but they're psychologically traumatized because of the war as well. And we've got no experience treating trauma in Ukraine. Can we please have a copy of your book? Do you have it in Ukrainian language version? And I said, well, funnily enough, guys, I don't have it in Ukrainian, but I'm going to get it translated into Ukrainian for you and sent out as a PDF. And I did that. And then the more I thought about it, I thought, my God, that's so impressive that a post-Soviet country, in inverted commas, could be so forward-thinking in their desire to treat mental health issues that I was blown away. So I decided to visit. I went to Kiev, and I instantly, like that, felt something touch me emotionally with this country. And then every time since 2015, I had an opportunity to return for work or to exhibit or do a talk or see friends, I would seize it. And by about 2020, I just thought, and then I met my now partner, Lukiria, who's from Kiev. I just thought, what am I doing living in London when I could be where my heart is, which is in Kiev? So I moved here in 20, and all the time I was planning this book. So for 5 or 6 years, I'd been planning this book called Stop Tank Food Books about the conflict in Donbass and about the occupation of Crimea. It was always the same concept, the same project, which was to send it out to the international community in a targeted dissemination in order to get support for Ukraine in its continued fight for independence. That was always the concept. So that shows you this war has been going on for 8 years. The issues have been the same. The arguments have been the same. The brutality and the Russian aggression has been the same. It's never been a civil war. And all these myths that have been perpetrated, kind of put out there, disseminated, all this disinformation from the Kremlin, unfortunately, has been picked up by the Western media. The most obvious one and the most repeated one is that Ukrainians are fascists. And unfortunately, many people in the West have perpetuated that myth without fact checking, and it's just not true. We have a Jewish president here, for God's sake. How can that work? How can you have a fascist state run by a Jewish president? It just doesn't add up, does it? Yeah. So I started this book 5 years ago. It was ready over 2 years ago, before the pandemic hit. And my publisher just let me down with it again and again and again. So every few months I would say to him, listen, we've got to get this printed. We've got to get this out. It's really important. Please give me a date when I can arrive. We can make the book together. And for 2 years this went on. And by November last year, I just said to him, look, I can't wait anymore. This is too urgent now. I'm convinced an invasion is going to happen within weeks. And he still didn't come through for me. So I found another publisher, and I'm so pleased I did. It's a guy in California who runs Nazradi Press, who have done work with Alex Soth and Todd Heido and some really great American photographers and British photographers too. And he immediately got the urgency of it. He understood it. He dropped other projects and he leapt in with me, and just phenomenal support. And we worked pretty much every day for 2 months getting the PDF ready. The book's in 3 languages, English, Russian, Ukrainian, because we want to be very transparent about it. This isn't just about talking to the West. This is about Ukrainians. It's their lives. It's got to be written in Ukrainian too. And it's got to be in Russian too, because Russians have to understand what's going on. This book has to end up in Russian libraries. You know, every single word in the book is present in 3 languages, basically. So it contains my images that I've taken in Ukraine over the past 5 or 6 years. It contains short stories from Luba Yakinchuk, an incredible Ukrainian writer who's described her experiences living in Russian-occupied Donbass in 2014. It's got research, ethnographic research from the Center for Eastern European Studies in Berlin. It's got my introduction about life living in Kiev with 100,000 troops, Russian troops massed on the border. And it's got my call to action to the international community.
And what is that call? A call that no doubt is shaped by your experiences researching the history and now living in the country. Those requests, the desires are what?
Get NATO involved. Facilitate and enable Ukraine's membership of EU and NATO immediately. Toughest sanctions against Russia, but really imposed, not just, you know, described or predicted or talked about, but actually imposed, and a debunking of all the myths about who Ukrainians really are. A whole list of things, basically. So we rushed at breakneck speed to get the book done. It was printed in Istanbul in Turkey at Mazmat Bar Printer, who also dropped other projects and worked incredibly hard and quickly to get the book done before invasion happened. We got the book made in 2 weeks, which is a record apparently for this printer to do a high quality, huge book so quickly. Yeah. And then we started sending out the first few hundred copies literally 4 days before the invasion happened. And actually, today, there's another 400 books going out to diplomats, celebrities.
Yeah, that was the plan, wasn't it?
Politicians. Yeah. That was always the plan, to hit those people, target those people who have a power to help Ukraine in some way. You know, it might be because they're celebrities and they have a voice. It might be because they're involved in peace negotiations or sanctions or NATO or German government or whoever it might be. So that also has been very demanding, is coming up with that list. You know, because these aren't just people you just Google and find, I've got his email address. Do you know what I mean? It's talking to people, finding wheels within wheels of power and all that stuff.
And while the book is being sent free of charge to the people, if you will, who can at least affect opinion change, or at most actual change, there'll be a way, won't there, for everyone to buy this incredibly potent book. I know there's a pre-order site, which I'll link to in the show notes, for example. But that's important too, isn't it? That it can find its way onto everyone's shelves outside the politicians.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that. And so, you know, we decided this wasn't just about doing some kind of piece of conceptual art, but exactly that. It had to have a commercial presence. It had to have as much presence as possible in order to help Ukraine. So it's also available to buy from Nazradi Press in America, and Setanta Books is the distributor in Britain. So they send out to Europe as well. And they also have been incredibly supportive. I mean, Nazradi Press have worked basically for free. I know that Chris at Nazradi Press has more or less decided to donate any income from the project directly back into the Ukrainian economy in some way, or Ukrainian charities, or into Ukrainian support networks. You know, everybody involved has just worked tirelessly to give everything they can. And that's been going on for months now, not just since the invasion happened 4 days ago. But what I don't understand, and I still don't understand, if I could see it, and I'm not a political strategist, I'm just some 55-year-old bloke with a camera. If I could see it coming, then you can be damn sure that a lot of other people knew it was in the post as well. And what did we do for 8 years? Nothing. We didn't report on it. We didn't write books about it. We didn't make movies about it. We certainly didn't do anything to stop the Russians or to impose sanctions against them. We did the opposite. We made London the playground of the oligarchy. which of course made Putin and his entourage feel totally enabled to do exactly what they want in Ukraine, because they thought, well, these guys, the only thing they respect is a buck, is making a bit of money, and us spending our money with them. So what the hell do they care about a few Ukrainians? They don't even know where Ukraine is. They think it's part of Russia, or they call it the Ukraine, when they're interviewed. No wonder they feel empowered to just do exactly what they want.
Mark Neville, and I'll return to him and our conversation in the show shortly today. We have an incredible team of patrons who help drive this show, and I'm always so thankful to you. You know who you are, for being there and forming this community of photographers who I believe truly care for each other and the work that we all produce. And being a member of our Patreon is a way really of making sure I can build this as a longer term project where we can continue to build that community of photographers who do truly help each other by sharing their pictures and their ideas and their projects, and just being a part of this. And from next week, there's a new Patreon feature in the middle of the show, a kind of island of inspiration from the members that we have. I thought that'd be appropriate to start that properly next week. But actually, I do kind of want to start it in a sense this week, and I'd like to introduce you to one of our super patrons, Emily Rainier, who you know Emily, don't you? Yes, you've spoken about her before. Of course I have, and I'll link to Emily's work in the show notes. And she wrote in about last week's special guest, Joel Meyerowitz. Emily, thank you so much for your letter, which is a response to the part of last week's show where we were talking about success and what success actually is or means. Whether it's making photographs because you like them, or whether it's because you love what you do, or whether you take them to make money. Emily recalls from the show the following quote. I could have played this, but I'll read it to you. Success is too often measured by financial success, but the success within yourself of doing something that brings you pleasure and educates you. To me, that's the goal, to understand something about yourself in the world that you live in through a medium that you're connected to, through some passion, through some big effort. If along the way you begin to have glimpses of yourself reflect through that medium and begin to share them with other people, that's a measure of success. It's all about the energy you've absorbed from the world and you transmit back out. That's success. And that was what Joel said, episode 183. 1 hour, 37 minutes in. Emily even noted the time. Joel reminded me, says Emily, I'd started to chase the wrong success in my life again. I was starting to chase numbers. I've been heading towards another dead end, and no, I'm simply not doing that again. I'm not making the same mistake twice. Curiosity, education, absorbing energy and transmitting it back out, that absolutely needs to be my direction now. So thank you, Joel, for helping to solidify this in my mind. Something's not been right. I know it hasn't been right, and now I know exactly what's not right. I've now imposed myself a limit of bookings in my social photography for weddings and families that I'm taking on every year to free myself up for my real passion, which is photographing on the street, so I can go out there, keep being me, and keep finding my own success. I've said it already, haven't I, in this show today? Amen to that, as they say, Emily. I was so thankful for his time, such a gracious man, such a generous man. And I think it's often the way when you talk to photographers and artists and musicians that the higher, this might be a clumsy expression, but the higher up the tree they are, often the more generous they are as well. And I found Joel to be exactly that. It was an entire pleasure to talk with him. Honestly, I think we could have done as well, actually. I think I drew the conversation to a close at the end. I was feeling distinctly guilty for taking more of his time than would otherwise plan. But we will be speaking in the future. And he does return, actually, in a few weeks to talk about a new edition of a book. So that's to come. Let's hear a little from last week's show, episode 283 then. Joel Meyerowitz, Awakening Our Potential.
I think that people's appetite has increased worldwide. The photography is the universal language now. We used to think music was, and certainly it maintains that. But in the past, you used to have to buy a camera. If you wanted to take pictures, you had to buy a camera and walk around with it, have film in your pocket, be prepared to spend on the film, spend on the processing, and then do something with it. And that narrowed the field to those passionate amateurs or people who wanted to do that. And carrying a camera was a slight burden at the time, given the scope of it. But nowadays, the facility of the smartphone has bred a new kind of desire. And I think this has opened up the world to photographers being at ease in going out into the world making pictures. I think what's still difficult for most people is learning how to recognize their own identity. I think there's a lot of mimicry that goes on because there's such an abundance of imagery on the internet. People look at it and say, oh, I want to make pictures like that. And so I think mimicry is a leveler that sort of flattened a lot of photography. But people poke up. They get that inner line of understanding, and they rise to the occasion and begin to find their identity.
The incredibly inspiring Joel Meyerowitz. And as I say, he'll be appearing again shortly, or later on this month, on the show, talking about a book, a new edition of quite a famous book of his. So, let's hear from our next guest today. This is Mikhail Palinchak. He is a Ukrainian street and documentary photographer from Kiev. Since 2012, he's been a member of the Ukrainian Photographic Alternative and member of the Ukrainian Association of Professional Photographers. He was the official photographer to the 5th president of Ukraine, a founder of Untitled magazine and co-founder of Ukrainian Street Photography Group. And a lot of his work, actually, a lot of Mikhail's work is in private collections and permanent collections of photography museums. So it's fair to say that Mikhail has a lot to be proud of. And in times to come, I'd love to have him back on the show to talk about all of the above, really. But we had only really 10 to 15 minutes to talk, which started with a blackout, really, a physical blackout on Zoom, where the lights had to be off due to yet another air raid warning. So we kept it respectfully short. It's difficult to even imagine saying goodbye to your family, not knowing when you'll next meet. We tried to, in our house, have our boys comprehend what that would mean, as the news stories, of course, have been surfacing about just that over the last week. And they heard, but, did they really understand as they headed off to school in the morning? Because it's so far from the realm of what they believe could happen to them. But of course, in Ukraine, it's very real. It's happening now, and it's happened to Mikhail as he waits in his home city, waiting for events to unfold, making pictures and telling the story of Kiev.
Mikhail, before we start, how are you? How are you feeling?
I'm in big stress. I first time subscribed to different news channels all over Ukraine to receive immediate information what's happening all over Ukraine. From one side, you are very alerted, but from the other side, this constant messaging and receiving of all this news put you into a very huge stress all the time. In Kiev, we have air alert almost each hour. In a day, it's once in 2-3 hours. At evening, it could be each 10-15 minutes, and you need to run into shelter, or this shelter could be anything like basement or metro. Where my office located, we have special shelter, so it's very good. But there are a lot of people there, almost 100. So we cannot sit. So we are just standing and waiting when alert will finish. But for me, it's easier because I immediately first day transferred all my family into western part in Ukraine. And at least in this reason, it's easier for me that I need to think only by myself and not also for my kids and my wife.
How many children do you have?
2 boys. One is 13.
The other is?
6.
Okay. Well, I'm used to speaking with photographers, Mikhail, who are not usually local to the areas of the world they photograph during times of war or famine or conflict of this kind. You're Ukrainian, which makes this, of course, a far more personal story. Do you think the way that you photograph and the pictures that you make are different to other photographers because of that personal nature?
Yes, documentary photography should show objective situation. However, of course, for me, it's very personal. This is a war against me as well, and I cannot be objective in this situation.
You are a street photographer, though. I sense this is now a description that's changing for you. It seems that conflict and street is obviously now inevitably it's converging, isn't it?
I was doing a lot of years reportage and street photography in parallel. So when I need to change my view or perspective, when I was tired of doing some routine job, I went on the streets with small camera, just doing street photography. But for me, nothing changed in my method, how I work. Just I need to be more secure, so I need to more pay attention to what's going on around me.
As I followed the dateline of your Instagram, I can see the feed dramatically turn from the abstract and almost, playful observations of life in the city to where you are today. The bombed main TV tower, ad boards that have been printed to send strong messages of hatred to any invading soldier that should pass them. We talk a lot about social media on this program. For you right now, it and Instagram in particular seems to be an important way to connect emotionally with the outside world, with people that you've not met before. Do you feel supported?
When you see the news that one country put sanctions into Russia, other country gives Ukrainian weapon, you understand that, yes, Western world support us.
Yeah.
But you feel this when you receive 100 messages from unknown person on Instagram or Facebook with support, with asking how we can help you personally, and even your request to talk about Ukraine. At this moment, you see the real support from ordinary people as well.
I noticed that you've also been photographing the press at work, and I think there's a feeling that you are together in this with your photographic colleagues, that you're helping each other to tell the story of life inside Ukraine. Yeah.
In Kiev, each photographer who is doing this job a long time, we all know each other.
Yeah.
And for example, if I was on the place quicker than other, I easily can send my photos to the any agency that works in Ukraine, and it's okay. We work like this.
Yeah.
And especially now, when in Kiev it's very difficult to get from one side of the Kiev to another. Like we had 2 rockets aimed into Kiev television station, and one of them missed and aimed into Jewish Holocaust memorial called Babi Yar. So those who was closer went to document this.
I know there clearly won't be a typical day. The invasion is a week old as we talk, but take me, if you can, through today. What life day to day is for you as a photographer.
Today, for example, right now I'm in an apartment of my colleague. This is first time in 3 days that we decided to leave our office with shelter and went to apartment finally to get normal sleep and to have a shower, to change our clothes. So at this point, this is good evening, and I hope that nothing happened this night. It's very strict now in Kiev to walk. Kiev administration and overall government in Ukraine ask civilians not to walk streets even at a day. So I am trying to move by car. And right now I am waiting accreditation from Ministry of Defense. So additional paper shows that I am Ukrainian and I am allowed to shoot. So this is very strict now. And today I was just in a car, went to the local supermarket to buy some reserve of food and important things. So I made a few photos there and a few landscape of Kiev. I see that they put blocks on the roads, so any car cannot move very fast through the roads. On some streets there is already barricades, like it was in 2014 on Euromaidan. So and now this is all around the whole Ukraine.
You were the official photographer for the 5th president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, and he is, or was when I last saw, still in the city, standing with those who've stayed in the capital. What are your personal plans? Some are fighting, some are keeping the stores and the supplies moving. Some people are making barricades. What are your plans?
You know, we have a joke in Ukraine. Tell the God about your plans and he will laugh. So my plan for each day is to stay alive. So I think that everybody should do what they can do best. If the best I can do is to make photos and to send them worldwide, so I should do this right now. That's why I stay in Kiev and not leave, because I feel the importance of in the world what's going on in Kiev.
And my thanks to Mikhail Palinchak, and I promise to return to him for an extended story about his work, and of course we'll be staying in touch. So I or he will bring more news. And in the meantime, on the show page today, you will find a link to Mikhail's work and other photographers who have not been able to talk with, understanding, of course, that they are consumed by events and exceptionally busy at the moment. I have to say, I don't get the wanton destruction. As I walk amongst the countryside today, making my photo walk and taking my pictures and spending time on my own with you and making our pictures together, sharing time, it's just an indescribably different event to what I understand from my conversations with people like Mikhail across the last week. An entirely different feeling, entirely different mental feeling, of course. But I just don't get the destruction. I don't get what's achieved. What's won by destroying people's cities and towns and houses and livelihoods and neighborhoods. What happens in somebody's head that this even becomes a plausible thing that you can order, a plausible way that you feel other people can live, that you should have, I don't know, that little empathy, that you can sleep in your palatial bed at night as others are separated from their families, children from their fathers, as we heard with Mikhail there, and men who have to try and find it in their hearts and minds to explain to a wide-eyed son or daughter, and we've seen those pictures on the news, haven't we? Why exactly the world is seemingly turning upside down. So I returned to being a simple lad from the Shires, really. Just me with my camera. You know, Putin cuts this lonely figure sat behind these just obscenely long... what's that about? These obscenely long tables, separated even from his closest aides. I mean, he's a family man. He has 2 daughters, doesn't he? And possibly there's talk of a 3rd child. You know, we talk often in the sorry, I did say I wouldn't editorialise, and I've gone off on one, haven't I? But as I'm walking with you, we talk often in our family about, say often, we've talked from time to time, about your children being somehow proud of what their parents do. Yeah, and can you imagine that? Are you proud of what your dad does? Anyway, this isn't the BBC, so I think I'll bathe in the privilege of being able to admit confusion at this point. But I'd certainly be interested to receive your feedback on the guests that we have had on this week. If you write in to studio@photographydaily.show, studio@photographydaily.show, that email address you can use for everything, including sending the pictures of your own photo stories in. That's really important and precious to me, by the way, receiving the stories that you make as you're out with your camera, big or small. I know sometimes people feel they have to have something that's like some sort of photo essay, and we've had some fantastic adventures, of course, but equally just sometimes those shorter walks with your own thoughts, they're just as precious. So send those in, 2,000 pixels wide, to studio@photographydaily.show. Let's turn to our amazing Facebook group. We have a page and we have a group, but within the group there are so many photo stories to share from the group, and over the coming weeks I'm going to delve in further. I haven't really over the last few weeks done that, so I will do and share some of those incredible stories with a bit more focus. But I did see this come in as I was planning the photo walk, so it is one of those hot off the press pieces, really, from Benjamin Beattie, sharing what many of us probably feel right now. Plus there are some pictures that I've furnished the show page with today. Greetings all, says Benjamin. I do so hope this finds you all well and nicely warmed up from your photo walk. I hope you haven't eaten too many Garibaldis en route. I left today without the Garibaldis, and no doubt I said in the checklist earlier, Garibaldis check. Did I say that? They weren't in the car today. I find Neil's silky, reassuring tones to be more and more of a much-needed panacea to my rising anxiety levels, writes Benjamin these days, and I'd like to think of the Photography Daily community as a metaphorical coffee shop where we can settle in whilst the perpetual storms blow outside. But this week's developments have been hard to compartmentalise and have, brought great sadness, as Ukraine and my friends there hold a very special place in my heart. I felt compelled to go back and share some photographs of my time in Kyiv back in 2016, when it was alive with hope and a sense of newfound freedom. I'll never forget my travels around Kyiv, all the wonderful warmth and hospitality that I encountered there. The people I met were so kind and humble and proud and well-versed in philosophy and art and culture, history, politics and music. The architecture and scale of the buildings is utterly awe-inspiring. Every building is adorned with exquisite craftsmanship and attention to detail. It's unlike anywhere I've experienced since, and the atmosphere of the city, no matter what time of the day or night, truly alive. I left with a a collection of memories that I'll always carry with me, and a sense of gratitude for having experienced such beauty, generosity, joy and warmth and friendship and culture. I hope, says Benjamin, and pray for all of the brave mothers, fathers, sons and daughters fighting for each other and a free Ukraine. My heart goes out to all of those who are carrying the burden of war, and I hope one day to return when the streets are alive once more with that electric atmosphere. Until then, I pray for each and every one of those kind, generous people. Sending all of my PD friends love and best wishes wherever this may find you, from Ben. Oh, thank you, Ben. Thank you indeed for those words. And I will share your pictures on the show page. And sincerely, I'm very grateful for you finding the time to look up those pictures again and share those with us. I did, by the way, go online to the control panel of this show last night to look at something I don't often study too closely, save the important commercial cursory glances for sponsor stats, of course. I drilled into the geography of where the show is downloaded. And whilst each month the listeners or downloads are broadly a mixture of photographers living in Europe, the Americas, and then Australasia, and then the rest of the world. America and the UK usually very close and sometimes sort of switching places with each other. It was Ukraine and Russia that piqued my curiosity as I looked at the world download map that I'm able to see. Of course, gradually they're going dark, aren't they? And like their leader, they're, as I said before, cutting this lonely figure in a world. So maybe you're with me today on this walk. I don't know from those two places in the world. But a friend of mine who was, and I stress was, a Russia Today presenter for many years, worked out of London and out of Moscow, actually. I think most of it was out of Moscow. Somebody I've known since my days in BBC regional and local radio, so that's going back 32 years. I haven't checked in properly for a couple of years, but yesterday we had a chat, and I noticed his reels, his reports on a station that was really as he described it, it was initially supposed to be a project that was to be more open and transparent in media terms. And, well, they'd simply gone. They'd disappeared. Or I couldn't connect to them at any rate. But I thought it was interesting to look at those figures, where people are, as I say, it's voice upon voice upon voice, isn't it? When you spread a message and you start a movement, one voice leads to another, to another, to another. So if you're able to, I would be fascinated to hear from you and what you see and what you hear. Send your emails, please, to studio@photographydaily.show. So, I want to return to Mark Neville, the artist and photographer and author behind this incredible book, Stop Tanks with Books. This is a shorter second half of our conversation, actually, and rather more personal, which I think is important contextually as much as anything when you consider these are all human stories. So let's return now to Mark Neville, who's in Lviv.
Mark, do you feel an outpouring of support in any way?
Well, the country feels supported by people. So, myself and my partner, my friends have received an enormous tidal wave of emotional reaching out from people all over the world saying stay strong, keep on going. But the counterpoint to that is the slowness of governments to actually enforce sanctions, to support Ukraine. And what people, I think, fail to understand is that, the war won't end with Ukraine. It will go on. It will go on to Poland. It will go on to Lithuania. It will go on to Slovakia. And, the threat will just move from one country's border to the next, basically. So now is the time to do something. Otherwise, it'll just get worse and worse and worse in terms of the threat to the rest of the world. And the other thing people don't understand is that this is a sovereign country. It was part of Russia and the Soviet Union at one point, but it's been a sovereign, independent country for 30 years. They've had two popular uprisings when the Kremlin tried to impose its own leader in Kiev in Ukraine. And that tells you that people here, they want the freedoms of the West that we've been so spoilt with and taken for granted for so many years. You know, they want a good judiciary system. They want a good education system. They want fair, clean elections. They want a health service. You know, they want these things and they're prepared to fight for them. And I think that's the big difference between Ukrainians and the rest of some elements of the rest of Europe and the world, is they're prepared to pick up a gun to fight for those freedoms, not because they're a violent people, not at all, because they really value the freedoms that we take for granted.
And I think that's been one of the facets of the news coverage that has made me think twice what it means to value your freedom. That the ultimate sacrifice is not a platitude. It's a very real thing. And our children, Mark, who are 13 and 11, are watching this unfold. They're seeing on the news fathers and doctors and mothers and seeing what you may clumsily refer to as normal, everyday people making Molotov cocktails, practicing on rifle ranges, signing up, knowing that they're facing aggression that could well be indiscriminate.
I mean, it is surprising for a lot of people to see, I think, but I understand it now.
Yes.
Because I've been here for a year and a half.
Yes. I
have feelings about this country that I don't really have about my own. I know it sounds terribly unpatriotic of me to say it, but it's true. I certainly wouldn't pick up a gun to save Britain against the Russian invasion, I have to say, but I have those feelings about Ukraine. And so I can completely empathise with these people here and their desire to protect themselves. I also know what it's like under a Russian occupation force, because Luba Yakimchuk has written about it in my book. And she was there when the Russians invaded Donbass in 2014, and people were tortured, kidnapped, set on fire. Just a Russian regime here would not be pleasant.
No.
There's a reason why as well. There's a motivation for people to resist that regime, because it will be horrific. And, you know, you can see beautiful pictures coming out of Moscow year after year. It's a beautiful city. I've exhibited myself in Moscow in 2017 in a state museum. In other words, I exhibited in a state museum funded by Putin. So that tells you how seductive, you know, the whole context of Moscow can be. I regret it. I deeply regret it, but it's true. It's a fact. I had ethical questions about doing it at the time, I remember. So I do get the kind of seduction of the Russian context in terms of culture, but I mean, I'm horrified to think I exhibited in Moscow, even though it was, 6 years ago. I'm horrified.
I've been following your coverage of what's happening on your Instagram account, and of course I'll link to that within the show notes. And the latest post quote, as of today, as I read it anyway, was toward the world press and media. You wrote, "I have a Ukrainian press pass. I live in Ukraine. My friends live here too. Instead of sending more and more reporters from abroad who don't understand the situation or the language or how to move around, contact me and either I will do it for you for no or little money, or I'll connect you with amazing Ukrainian photographers who'll do a better, more accurate job than any of us." For you, this is a respect issue as well, isn't it, for the country?
Well, it's respect, but it's just practical. It's not rocket science. It's like, of course, this country has amazing photographers. Of course, they're very talented people, but they're multilingual. I mean, so many people here speak English or several languages: Russian, Ukrainian, English, French, German. And it's about them getting paid for their work, and photography and reporting and journalism starting to be valued in Ukraine as a profession, as a media, as a medium, as a career path. It just makes more sense. Of course, you're going to get more accurate reporting from people who actually live here, who know what's going on, who speak the language, who don't misinform, because they know the facts. I do get to a certain extent why it's important to have foreign media who are objective to a certain extent and report on the situation. I do get the necessity for that. But there's a total imbalance. I've not seen any reporting, or very little reporting, from Ukrainian journalists, media or photographers on the situation disseminated to a worldwide audience. And that's not because these people aren't here. It's not because those journalists aren't here and unable to do it. They're totally able to do it. But, the world media and press won't give them the bloody chance, because they're so narrow-minded that they think it's better to spend $50,000 to send a film crew somewhere than to pay a Ukrainian journalist $1,000 to do it more accurately on the ground in their home. It just beggars belief to me. I think there just needs to be a complete shift in the way we think about reporting. I'm not saying that all the Western media channels are getting it wrong. They're not. A lot of them are getting it exceptionally well reported, well done, and they're real professionals, and they risk their lives, and they, they should be applauded on many levels. But the imbalance is obscene, and it's not helpful. It's not giving the world an accurate picture. And we need to give the world an accurate picture if we're going to avoid conflicts in the future. And if we're going to move on from this, and if we're going to find peace, we need to understand as accurately as we can what's happening. And that can only happen if you employ people working in their own countries.
We started our conversation with you describing how exhaustive it is to be in a situation where you're having to make moral or ethical choices, such as looking after your family, or picking up a gun to fight, or fundraise, or take pictures, or even to talk to people like me. Have you resolved that in any way? Have you decided what you will and can do next?
Well, I've got a raft of Ukrainian photographers I'm trying to hook up with work, so I'll be doing that for the next 2 hours, I guess. So after that post, I've been gratefully approached by many people in the Western media saying, we'd love to work with the Ukrainian photographer. Can you connect us? So I'm drawing up a list at the moment. I've got to get that out. Then I've got a whole raft of people as well contacted me, even since we spoke, and saying, I've just arrived in Lviv, I don't know where to stay, I've got nowhere to sleep, can you help me? I've got other friends of mine trying to get across the border. I'm trying to, at some point, take pictures of my own as well. I've got to look after my partner. I've got to orchestrate the making of a postcard, which is going to be sent out with the next batch of books. So I've got to get that designed here, and I've got more interviews to do as well. So that's the next day or so. After that, I don't know.
I'm so appreciative of the time Mark afforded me and us on this podcast. Particularly as now you understand that not only is he photographing, documenting, telling stories those ways of what's going on in his newly adopted country that he clearly very much loves, but also the fact that he's working just to help other people enter the city, go through the city, find places of refuge. So, Mark, thank you sincerely. I'm not sure whether you'll have time to listen back to the podcast in these days and weeks and months. I don't know, but if you do, my thanks sincerely for your time, and I would dearly love to chat to you in other circumstances, other times, about more of your work. I'll link to Mark's website. His projects are just fantastic, and honestly, you can just lose yourself in his website and his works for, as I did, for a good few hours at least, and then some. So it's a different kind of photo walk today, I know, though hopefully you've been able to make your pictures and spend time with your thoughts, as always, with me as we walk and make these pictures together. Wherever you are today, it would be fantastic to get some pictures that you've made while you're out walking. I never see enough, and I know a lot of people because I've had these conversations think, he won't want my pictures. He's got all those other ones and all those other great stories. But no, you couldn't be further from the truth. I would love to see where you are. I call it the sort of geographic diary. I really think of it like that. So send them, please, to the email address that I've given you a couple of times, studio@photographydaily.show. And that's the same address, by the way, that you can send your 365s into. And there have been some cracking Community 365 images of late. In case you haven't understood what the 365 is about, or perhaps you're new here, I know I saw last week, particularly following Joel's appearance, that there were a number of new listeners that had joined us. Then the Community 365, and I'm stepping very carefully here because I'm literally in a quagmire. It's just so muddy today out on this walk. Thank heavens for the boots. But yeah, the Community 365 was set up really so that those who wanted to take part in a 365 feature but didn't want to perhaps have that stress of doing it day after day after day, because it is a stressful thing. I know a lot of people start it and then by February, March, it's they're done. They can't do any more. It is a stressful thing to think, right, I've got to make a picture today, tomorrow, the day after that. So Community 365 is very much an opportunity to take part with other people who are making images, to be part of a 365 without the stress of having to do it every single day. And the pictures that I'm receiving are wonderful. Thank you so much for them. I always feel a little awkward when highlighting single pictures in particular, because really we could do 7 picture reviews a week on this show, and you can easily follow the photographers' links back to their work on their own Instagrams and websites if you go to the Community 365 page, which is on the website, because I do have links so that you can see more of the photographers' work or works that are taking part. But Neil, I get this idea you're about to highlight one. Yes, I am. I adored Mathieu Chauveau's picture on Tuesday, so that would be the 1st of March, of his young daughter peering out of this big ferry window seaward, port side, I believe. What is it? Port out, starboard home, or is it port home, starboard? What was the expression? I'm sure it's port out, starboard home, wasn't it? This small person looking out at a vast ocean. You get this real picture of it's glorious, this wonderment of a child's intrigue. And it's practically, I suppose, a silhouette concept in many ways. Just wonderful, really. And full of, here comes my favourite word, full of serenity. As Matthew writes, I'm a psychiatric nurse and part-time documentary family photographer living in Lyon in France. My inspiration takes its roots in people, and yet it took me a while to figure out that the pictures that moved me most, especially when walking around town, all contained some kind of human element. I have to thank Dennis Schauer for opening my eyes to this. This is a picture of my daughter Tim looking out at the sea on our way to Corsica. One of my favourite pictures of the year for obvious fatherly reasons. Somewhere on the Mediterranean Sea. And it is a fantastic picture. And that's why I was delighted to feature it in the Community 365. On the notion, by the way, of calm and serenity, I'm not quite sure how to take this one. A wonderful friend and patron, Nikki Heppenstall, left the following words in the Facebook group, a letter to our friends in there. I've read, says Nikki, or heard a few comments recently about your voice meaning my voice, or what's coming, or along the lines of being calming and such. Lynn Fraser, who's another one of our patrons, is not the only one, says Nikki, who listens to the podcast before going to sleep each night. I've listened to spoken word before sleep most nights, says Nikki, for more than 3 years, since losing some ability to concentrate on reading fiction, which used to be my go-to, but it's less effective these days at focusing my busy brain enough to allow sleep to happen. I'm not sure I quite like where this is going. What Nikki's saying is that this Photowalk show has become her hypno-listen, or at least I within it. The downside is that I have to listen at least twice to capture the second half because I fall asleep and I miss it. This is absolutely not a reflection on the content of the podcast. It's a compliment to you, Neil, on your easy, friendly delivery style and the sense that you're talking to just me. Hashtag smooth talker. Nikki, I shall take a hashtag. I don't think I've ever been a hashtag before. Well, not like that anyway. Though clearly not demeaning the serious nature of the one I mentioned at the start, we perhaps have a movement, the smooth talker movement. Of course, the irony of reading your letter at the end of the show today, or toward the end, is that you probably won't hear it. It's not exactly lost on me, he says, with a wry smile. You'll get it on the second time of listening, clearly. So let's focus again, and for the final time today during the Photowalk on our newfound friends and names in Ukraine, and this time it's Wolfgang Schwan, who I will link to on the show page. Many links to go and visit today, many important links. Wolfgang is, he's one of the names who's been appearing in feeds alongside his pictures, some of which you will find on his Instagram. I think this is an interesting story about somebody who is photographing his first war, that explorative notion of learning about a country and the people and the nuanced politics that comes with that task, really. And I remember talking to my good friend Giles, who I know we talk about on the show from time to time, a former head of photography in the British Army, about conflict and this draw that it seemingly has to some photographers. And I remember well his response emotionally, though I'm going to paraphrase. People think war photography is somehow glamorous. It's not. It's full of horror and putrid smells, and well, he expanded on that within the film I made with him about his legacy and life behind the camera. But clearly his feelings about war photography being anything but glamorous were certainly well documented within his answer. And of course, last year I also spoke to Jason P. Howe, who's he's a very respected conflict photojournalist who is now retired from it, living and photographing in the hills of Andalusia. But he, of course, talked of his formative trip to Colombia. And it's so hard to dissect what makes or drives a person's calling. And what I don't want is I don't want our conversation to become some kind of macabre conversation about becoming a war photographer. I mean, I remember reading Don McCullin's first tentative steps into conflict, which for him came in the early 60s, 64, in Cyprus, work which was recognized by those in the business of showing the truth and the news, both in further commissions and awards, which I know many photographers feel a mixture of pride and discomfort as equal partners. So with those three thoughts or memories in my mind, and of course I could add to that Tom Stoddart, the late Tom Stoddart as well, couldn't I? And of course the words of Mark Neville, also in terms of how he would like news outlets to embrace more local photographers too. I think this is an interesting human angle story. Again, we don't have a whole lot of time, and that idea of a longer conversation where I really have time to unpick a photographer's personal journey, background and backstory, clearly that's not applicable or appropriate on this occasion. But I think it's worth saying that it's approximately 4 years since Wolfgang first seriously began photographing for any kind of reward. And that reward, as you're about to find out, is a mixture of earning a living, but equally being engaged in something where he feels a sense of responsibility and a genuine calling. So yes, I wish I'd had longer with Wolfgang, though we promised to stay in touch as the days and weeks pass. His evenings are spent filing, so the idea that I should have any time at all with him, as with all my guests today, was something I was very aware of in terms of time taken. That said, here's my conversation with a photographer doing his bit in Kyiv, Wolfgang Schwalm.
Wolfgang, before we start, how are you feeling at the moment? I mean, I would imagine tired is one expression.
Yeah, a bit tired. We've been working every single day trying to get stories from the train stations with civilians heading west, some civilians heading east to go join the fight in Kharkiv or go see family in Dnipro, Zaporozhye, or to head to Mariupol before today. I believe today it was encircled, are the reports that were coming in. But lots of folks heading west to Lviv before going to Poland, or just kind of leapfrogging their way from town to town going west, and seeing what's comfortable for them, how far away they are from anything happening here in Kiev. Since last Thursday, we've been all operating on not a lot of sleep.
Yeah.
The city put in a curfew a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
So everyone had to be home by 5 p.m. each day. And then today it got pushed to 8.
I know you've spent time with the army and territorial forces, taking and filing stories. And it comes across within your writing and the pictures too, that there wasn't necessarily the expectation that it would escalate quite like this at this time, from your stories and your pictures at least.
For many people that I've talked to in the 2 months and then weeks and days leading up to this, there wasn't a whole lot of worry here in Ukraine. And I mean, internationally, in between the kind of the war drums beating from the West saying that this will happen this week, kind of every other week you would hear that out of the White House, there would be a few stories that would come out on like Kiev is carrying on like nothing is happening. Nightclubs are full, like churches are full on Sundays. People are walking the streets, they're grocery shopping. Being here on the ground, that was all I would see. If you didn't look at the news, you would have no idea that 100,000 soldiers were on the border. A lot of folks that I would talk to, I got the sense that it kind of the whole country felt like the boy that cried wolf one too many times. And they've been at war essentially with Russia for 8 years. Whether Crimea or the Russian-backed separatists in the east. And there have been yearly Russian buildups on the border, whether it's training drills or they just put soldiers there and then try and coax something out of the West. There have been many, many times over the past 8 years that people have feared a war. And I think at this point, it had just been tiring for Ukrainians to continue to worry.
So what then brought you to Ukraine then? Because you're a distance from Philadelphia, which is where you're based these days. What made you travel and think, well, I think I need to be there?
So, I mean, I had last year in April, the same sort of situation before last week when this turned into a full war.
Yeah.
I had seen that there was a Russian buildup then. I had figured out the avenues that you had to take to go and get access to the soldiers. There's a JFO accreditation you need that you have to apply with the Ministry of Defense here. I had gone through all those routes. So in kind of the beginning of November of 2021, when the buildup was reported in the news, I immediately applied again and kind of told myself that maybe this happens, maybe it doesn't. It has not happened in the past yet. And if nothing does happen, I get to go to Ukraine. I've never been to this country before and learn a lot about the nation in general, the people, the food, and get to go learn about the conflict in the East and meet soldiers who have been fighting there and educate myself on this. And if it does break out into a conflict in the future, then I'm better prepared to report on it. If it does happen while I'm there, then I'm there.
Well, now you are here, and in a comparatively short career so far, your work has been published around the world. You're no stranger, Wolfgang, to situations that are inflammatory. But I know this is your first war, and so I'm intrigued to know what a freelance photographer filing for a living is thinking as Russian hardware is edging inexorably closer. I would imagine you take your cue from locals, from the feeling of locals, whether that's authority or those going about their day-to-day, because that's a sense that in this situation must be quite important to listen to and respect. What have you observed as somebody who I imagine is reading signals wherever he can read them?
So over the past week now here in Kiev, there's a tension and jitteriness of the soldiers, the police, the various militias that guard these checkpoints here in the city. There's been a handful of incidents of friendly fire, just from, I don't know if it's sometimes civilians not knowing proper checkpoint etiquette, like driving a little bit too fast into them. It seems at the moment like covering, if there is combat in Kiev, it seems like it will be really tricky and very dangerous. And I, at the moment, don't have a translator fixer for this. So as of today, I'm going to keep covering the folks leaving the city. If there are rocket attacks in the city, we kind of jet to those. And I'm kind of figuring it out day by day at the moment. This is all very, very fluid. The situation has been changing daily on, like, Ukraine looks like they're winning. They're pushing back, not holding the Russians at bay at least. And then today or last night we got, there's a 40-mile long convoy that's north of Kiev. But then this evening it looks like lots of them are out of gas and it's gridlocked. So the news that's coming in is all over the place, and it's a little bit overwhelming at times to stay on top of. But
I was going to ask you about that. If you're in Kiev and you're in this city and you're watching the same news feeds that we see and the same satellite pictures that we see with 40-mile convoys of Russian military vehicles making their way towards you, I would imagine there must be, I mean, you were talking about tension with the police and the army there. There must be a certain amount of tension that the media feel as well.
Yeah, I know a lot of crews have moved out, but every day I see more and more journalists coming into the city. There's a lot of people who want to be here for the story and want to tell the story of the Ukrainians that are staying and the ones that will be here for the fight. So I think there's a lot of people who have been doing this sort of work for many, many, many years and feel confident working in the situation.
There's a picture of yours that I've seen on many news outlets. It's the photograph of a woman bandaged on her head in front of what I assume is her apartment complex, which has been struck by a missile. She looked to be in conversation with you, and I wonder these days whether you're expected to report as well as photograph.
So I do 99% photography. I will do like little video clips as well, just like 10-second little shots for when I'm working for the agency. And then here and there, I need to do some like sound bites of just asking people basic questions on. I had to do a couple days at the train station and just basically age, name, why it is that you're leaving Kiev, and then the direction that you're heading and why you're going to that location. Because we found it interesting that it's predominantly people heading to the west, but there was a surprising amount of folks signing up for the fight and heading east, or their families were to the east. There's lots of people that have no intention of fighting, but they want to be with loved ones in Kharkiv or Dnipro or Zaporozhye, and didn't want to go west or didn't want to stay in Kiev, but just want to be around loved ones.
In the days and weeks to come, this story is going to no doubt escalate. You're now working and filing 2 agencies. Who decides, Wolfgang, upon the risk? Is it you or a pictures desk that sends you requests that you may or may not feel comfortable about or with?
I would 100% say that all of the risk choices fall on my lap. I haven't been by them or anyone else pushed to go into a situation that I'm uncomfortable with. In the situations that I've been in so far, I've been, for the most part, comfortable. I haven't been told, like, you need to go do this, where I need to draw the line for myself. So far, it's been pretty much overwhelmingly like concern coming from the editors, and here and there touching in, like, are you sure that you don't want to leave yet? Which has been very, very comforting to hear, and not trying to get pushed out of the comfort zone.
And I know inevitably now you will be showing pictures that are reactionary to events, but when you have the time, I noticed that you make pictures that concentrate upon the human story, that show the people, that take you behind the scenes, particularly when you've spent time with the soldiers and some of the quieter moments.
Yeah. I think that to me, what was interesting was getting to talk to a lot of these guys, being from another country, but like finding things that we would relate on, and trying to show the human element, I guess, to what everyday life looks like for these guys. Whether that is the pictures that are up on the wall, Ukrainian children from, I don't know how many schools in the country, a lot of them, the children will make little drawings on what they think of Ukraine and the soldiers, and lots of times it's really heartwarming stuff, like soldiers holding hands with kids, or like a soldier being kissed on the forehead by his wife. So those sort of things, or the lots of guys. It's like you play on your phone a lot. You're there with the same 30 guys for 6 to 9 to 12 months in a trench, and when you're not actively working the front line, you doom scroll on your cell phone, and I think that's a relatable thing for most people. We do that at work. So yeah, I try to look out for those moments and make it a little bit different from just the guy with the gun in the trench.
Well, when this interview airs, the news, the pictures will be different again. And I know that podcasts are listened to often weeks, months after a publishing date. But working in the here and now, as we talk, Wolfgang, have you made any personal plans as a photographer as to staying, as to leaving, according to what the military situation becomes?
It looks like the plan is for Russia to encircle Kiev. I haven't made a decision yet on if I would stay in that situation. Part of me is a little bit, there's an apprehension to stay, because if you do get encircled and then they decide they're going to escalate rocket attacks or send in thermobaric missiles, then it's a bad situation to be in. But if that does happen, if I'm here, I'll do my best to effectively cover the civilian life here. If we have access to soldiers in that situation, that's what I'll be trying to cover as well. I've got 2 other guys that are with me that are dependent on the rental car that I've got. So we're going to make a decision as a group on where everyone's comfort line is in the coming days, and see what that looks like. But yeah, I've made quite a few promises that I've pushed back to my mom back at home on when the exit date would be. But
interestingly, if you decide to leave, family, I would imagine, are a consideration for you as well.
Yeah, so I've got 2 younger brothers. I'm the oldest of 3. Otto and Gunnar are the younger ones. We're all within 3 years and quite close. Both of them are very, very supportive. All 3 of us are supportive of each other, and this kind of just chase what you love sort of mentality within our family comes from, both of my parents grew up in the Midwest in pretty conservative families. Both of them were artists and ended up like moving around the whole country doing the starving artist till they made it lifestyle, and felt that was their way, that they wanted to teach their kids, that hopefully you can make money doing what you enjoy doing as long as you find purpose in it and it has meaning to you and is fulfilling. That's what you should chase first before money.
My appreciation today to all our guests, ending with Wolfgang Schwan. And that's it for today's walk. Slightly different to the regular format, but for very good reason. There are other photographers and journalists I reached out to who, for a myriad of reasons, weren't able to appear, but may well in the future. And I'll leave links to those photographers and their work today. Over the coming weeks, more stories of life from photographers as we walk together. Actors, musicians turned photographer. More from Joel Meyerowitz, and John Carmichael returns with a story about being mentored by the world's biggest collector of photography, Sir Elton John, and I'll tell you what's on tomorrow's More patron show in a moment. And of course we have a song to play out with, don't we? Where we can keep walking together and think about what's been said as we make some final frames this week together. I seem to have ended up by a sort of a man-made kind of brook. The water running off the fields. You can hear it, can't you? It's that sound I say every week that I'm looking for in the countryside, that sort of, that relaxing sound. Oh, I think I'll stay here a while and listen to that. Now, you know, I really wanted to end with a Ukrainian artist, but it seems copyright infringement, even with approval from the artist, is a difficult hoop to jump through in podcast land. But I'll certainly be trying to feature one in the coming weeks. But I have found a song, one from a musician called Vic Davy, that I think is a fitting play-out song this week. It's a song called Peace.
If these walls animals could speak. They'd have nothing to say. If these ears could hear again, would they hear you breathe my name? Absent-hearted at dawn, will the heavens turn their aim? And dare I moan a word once more? Every day persists the same. Spine with no embrace, and all the living are calling out. Their perfect eyes can see your face. This leather binding forlorn, how long can we play the game? Cause I believe your love will pour out as the heavens turn their aim. They say peace will come, peace will come, peace will come. They say peace.
I'm from Ukraine and I've got mum in Sumy, and there is a massive battle in Sumy for 2 days. Mum, she's alone. We lost our dad 2 months ago and we left her alone. She's in shelter for 2 days now.
I just want to declare Putin will not stop Ukraine in our movement to the European Union.
I'm sorry, so shocked. I just can't help crying.
We just thinking about them and we check phone whether she's online or not, whether she's able to tell us what's going on and if she's alive.
My name is Yaroslav.
Your name is Yaroslav. How old are you, Yaroslav?
I am 9 years old.
Are you scared?
So-so.
So-so, you're a very brave boy.
Vic Davy, and peace. And that's it for this week. My thanks to our guests, Mark Neville, Mikhail Palinchak and Wolfgang Schwan, as well as John Carmichael and Joel Meyerowitz. My thanks to our wonderful patrons too, for whom tomorrow on our supporter channel, which you can link to through the website photographydaily.show, we have The More Show. This week the diary is back and I'm causing trouble unbeknowingly at airport security. I have a picture on a page from Bill Brandt's Shadow of Light. 5 things I love about photography is from a photographer called Chris Rogalski, who only recently, quit his job to do this thing we love full-time. And what I've learned about photographers and photography during a week where I really needed to rethink how I approach being an interviewer. Some personal thoughts. There were 79 more episodes. This one will be more number 80, and it's on tomorrow morning on the Patreon channel. Music on the show from the incredible artlist.io, and I look forward to photographing with you, hearing from you, and talking with you next time.
Photography Daily is a Loading Zone production.